Well, I guess it's a topic I never expected us to cover on Power Hour, but this has to do with pornography, or rather, it has to do with a study that's come out by a French think tank called the Shift Project, where they point out or claim that our transmission and viewing of online videos, it generates 300 million tons of carbon dioxide a year, or 1% of global emissions. And that's made up mainly of on demand video services like Netflix, which is a third, and pornography, which generates another third. And so the news reports have pointed out that this means that pornographic videos generate as much CO2 as entire countries, including Belgium, Nigeria, and Bangladesh. And the authors of the study go on to say that we need to limit emissions from online videos by doing things like preventing them from doing autoplay and by not transmitting videos in high definition when it's unnecessary. And the report calls for regulation in this direction.
That's
And
my favorite is is whether high definition is necessary.
yeah.
I want to know how they're making that uh, calculation.
And well, but I think that's going to be relevant to the bigger the bigger problem I have with this is that there's all these decisions about what kind of speech and what formats of speech, which is effectively what you're talking about if you're talking about videos, um, are necessary, are good, or should even be allowed. And so, one thing that I think this illustrates is we're often taught to think about issues like this in terms of externalities. And, both people in the green movement, people in the free market movement, and the conservative world, they all will think in terms of externalities. And um, the idea is that we're having impacts that we ourselves are not internalizing on other people, and when those are negatives, then well, maybe the government needs to step in and do something about it. But every use of our freedom, particularly any use of energy, has so-called negative externalities. And so here we're being told that effectively our consumption of videos has these negative externalities with CO2 emissions, and therefore the government needs to regulate it. And so, now it could be focused on the kind of process part of it, like how high resolution is it and does it have autoplay? And I think that's bad enough, since like those are actually valuable, or at least to some people can be valuable. But I regard it as a real possibility that we will start hearing about how our speech has negative externalities, and so that has to be limited itself. And so you can imagine it starting with unpopular, at least, and arguably morally dubious speech like pornography. But you can also see it applied to something like Power Hour, where we are engaging in a negative externality by using the energy required to transmit this podcast and the videos we put out there. And heck, it's worse than pornography because it's trying to encourage people not to do anything about that externality. And so I think it's this is just one reason why, like, we think in terms of rights which protect your sphere of freedom, even acknowledging that there's going to be positive and negative impacts on others.
Yeah. So one aspect to think about here is that I mean, this is dealing with the realm of information, and I think of rights as it's defining your freedom of action, and it ultimately needs to be based on the fact that human beings need to act in order to survive and flourish. And a lot of what we need to do is we need to be able to produce value, which is why it's so detrimental to have the idea that, oh, there can be no emissions of any kind. If there are any emissions of any kind, then you're not allowed to produce, because if you're not allowed to produce, then you're really not allowed to live. But this is the realm of information. They're basically saying, hey, you are not allowed, like, the creation and consumption of information has physical different kinds of emissions, and that's absolutely true because it's made possible by these physical digital networks. And but they're what they're trying to do is take that idea, well, you're not allowed to emit anything, you have no right to emit, you shouldn't have any freedom to emit, to say, well, therefore, you shouldn't be able to use information. And then what happens is the government, what they'll try to do to be reasonable is to say, okay, well, no, you can emit some kinds of things, but not for porn, or not, or at least not in that, you don't need to see it in that high a resolution. Like they'll try to get involved in all these different ways, and you see this with Bitcoin. People say, well, you shouldn't be mining all this Bitcoin, and you really have to decide, do we have a right to pursue, to create and consume information? Yes, we do have a right to do that. And then part of that is we need to be free to choose what is the best for us. And so whatever the government is doing, it can't be involved in saying, oh, information, like you're not allowed to pursue information. And then it definitely can't be involved in, oh, this type is good and this type is bad.
I'm
Stefan.
also sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm also slightly confused by this because some years ago, Bill McKibben told me that instead of going on vacation in a physical manner, I should go through the internet and explore the world via video. So this seems to contradict this. Or they've advanced this plot a little bit by saying, "Oh, now that you're on video, you shouldn't use video either."
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it gets you, like quarantines you in your room. And then it's, oh no, you're not even allowed to do anything
And stop
in your
breathing.
room. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And well, really, you just need to quarantine everyone in the room. Then there will be nothing to put on the internet except porn in people's rooms, which will also not be allowed.